Anthony "White Tony" Johnson was a name synonymous with fear and notoriety in Manchester's underworld. His dramatic rise from street enforcer to one of the city's most feared gangland figures was only matched by his sudden, violent end, an attack that would cement his place in Britain's criminal history and leave his death shrouded in mystery to this day.
Anthony Johnson was born on the 22nd of July in 1968. Johnson was brought up in a home mired by tragedy, Winnie, and had been treated as a suspect over his stepson's disappearance for several years. For most of Johnson's childhood, he lived with his step-grandmother in Aston Avenue, Fallowfield.
Anthony "White Tony" Johnson, born on 22nd July 1968, grew up in South Manchester in an environment marked by hardship and loss. He never knew his father, and his mother was largely absent from his upbringing, leaving his care to his grandmother, Winnie. She herself carried deep scars. Her son, Keith, had been one of the victims of the infamous Moors murders in the 1960s, a case that horrified the nation.
Winnie, and had been treated as a suspect over his stepson's disappearance for several years. For most of Johnson's childhood, he lived with his step-grandmother in Aston Avenue, Fallowfield, in South Manchester. Johnson became known for his brazenness and fighting skills.
This devastating event left deep emotional scars on the family, and for young Anthony, it meant growing up in a household where grief was a constant, unspoken presence. With limited opportunities, and the streets offering both danger and allure, Johnson became drawn into Manchester's burgeoning gang culture of the 1980s. Known for his sharp dress sense, flashy lifestyle, and quick temper, he earned a reputation early on as someone not to be crossed, a man who would eventually rise to prominence in the city's underworld.
All of them were members of the Cheetham Hill Gang, later known as the Cheetham Hillbillies. The Cheetham Hillbillies would operate in the Waterloo estate in the 1980s and 90s. The gang specialised in robberies, drug dealing, and extreme violence.
By his mid-teens, Anthony "White Tony" Johnson had firmly embedded himself in the Cheetham Hill Gang, notoriously known as the Hillbillies. This crew dominated large parts of North Manchester's criminal landscape during the 1980s and early 1990s, dealing in everything from armed robbery to drug trafficking. The gang's name was ironic. They were anything but rural or laid back, instead cultivating a reputation for ruthless street justice.
When Tony was ambushed in the Penny Black car park, Tony was with his best friend Tony Mackay. At the time, they would be driving his white Ford Cosworth when they would be flagged down by two men in the car park, and their escape would be blocked.
Johnson's nickname, "White Tony," wasn't just a casual label. It was a way to distinguish him from another gang member, Black Tony, in a group that was otherwise predominantly made up of black and mixed heritage men. But the name soon carried weight far beyond identification. White Tony was known for his volatility, quick temper, and willingness to use force without hesitation.
The man who murdered Johnson knew what he was capable of and didn't take any chances with him. 2 of the 4 bullets that hit Johnson struck him in the back, another in the neck, and as he lay on the ground helpless, the final bullet was fired into his mouth.
As a teenager, he acted as both a robber and an enforcer for the Hillbillies, often tasked with collecting debts or sending violent warnings to rivals. Those who knew him said he had a knack for intimidation, walking into a room with a cold, fixed stare that made people lower their voices. His early years in the gang saw him implicated in numerous street robberies, armed holdups, and nightclub disputes, laying the foundation for his later rise as one of Manchester's most feared underworld figures.
Manchester's underworld was a powder keg, and the Cheetham Hill Gang, known as the Hillbillies, were lighting the fuse. This wasn't just a crew, they were a force.
In January 1988, Anthony "White Tony" Johnson committed what is believed to be his first major killing, a murder that would cement his reputation in Manchester's criminal hierarchy. Armed with a sawed-off shotgun, Johnson ambushed 26-year-old Anthony Scratch Gardner as Gardner arrived at a well-known shebeen, an illegal drinking den frequented by gang members and drug dealers. Witnesses recalled the deafening blast and the chaos that followed as patrons scrambled for cover. When police arrived, they not only found Gardner's lifeless body, but also heroin and cocaine scattered nearby, painting a clear picture of the world both men inhabited. The killing sent a shockwave through Manchester's underworld, signaling that,
as well as the Adatoro brothers, who would later become famous for their shootout with police on the M6 in April 2000. The Cheetham Hillbillies gang operated in the Waterloo estate in the 1980s and 1990s. The gang specialised in robberies, pushing drugs in clubs and violence.
Johnson was both willing and capable of eliminating rivals without hesitation. Far from lying low after the murder, Johnson's behavior grew increasingly reckless and confrontational. In one notorious incident, he escalated tensions between the Cheetham Hill gang and their rivals by tipping over a rival's car during a crowded Moss-side festival, turning what should have been a community celebration into a public display of gang dominance. His boldness didn't end there.
The Hacienda, the city's legendary nightclub, where he partied for free. But when he flashed a gun at the club's London doorman, the vibe shifted. Even Tony Wilson, the Hacienda's owner, felt the weight of the gangland menace creeping into his world.
Johnson led violent incursions into some of Manchester's most popular night spots, including the legendary Hacienda nightclub, which was at the heart of the city's booming music scene. These were not subtle shows of power. Armed with guns, Johnson and his crew would storm venues, intimidate staff, and openly threaten doormen, sometimes pressing a firearm to their chests. The intimidation became so severe that several clubs temporarily shut their doors rather than risk further gang interference. For many in Manchester at the time, it was a stark reminder that the city's cultural renaissance in music and nightlife was unfolding alongside, and often clashing with, a brutal gang war just beneath the surface.
The Hillbillies struck again, this time at the Moss Side Carnival. They located the man they had previously shot and vandalized his BMW, smashing it up in a brazen act of intimidation and retaliation. The feud between the gangs continued to escalate, painting a grim picture of the escalating gang warfare that plagued Manchester at the time.
By the early 1990s, Anthony White Tony Johnson had made more enemies than allies, both in rival gangs and within his own circles. His violent reputation and volatile disputes, particularly over robbery proceeds, had brought him into direct conflict with some of Manchester's most dangerous figures, including the feared Noonan crime family. The simmering tensions reached a breaking point in February 1991.
A £25,000 beast with a spoiler. It's the same car Manchester police use for its raw speed, but tonight it's Tony's chariot, a symbol of his untouchable status.
On the night of 22nd February, Johnson pulled into the car park of the Penny Black pub, driving his prized white Ford Sierra Cosworth. It was there that a carefully planned ambush unfolded. Witnesses later recalled the surreal sight of a man in a wheelchair leading the hit. As Johnson attempted to flee, gunmen opened fire, striking him in the back, neck, and mouth. Shots delivered with clinical precision, leaving no doubt that this was an execution rather than a warning.
Who I'm sure need no introduction. This was regarding the spoils. It was followed 4 weeks later by an £80,000 payroll robbery at the Bassett Street factory in Sheffield. The raid was carried out by 3 men who chased armed guard staff.
Police quickly suspected that the Noonan brothers had orchestrated the killing as retribution for disputes over stolen goods and territory. Desmond Noonan, alongside other known associates, was brought to trial in 1992, but the case collapsed. A second trial in 1993 also ended in acquittals, leaving the murder officially unsolved. In the streets, however, few doubted who had ordered Johnson's death. It was a message written in bullets.
Winterford Road in Cheetham Hill in February 1991, Johnson was ambushed by gunmen, resulting in a shootout. Johnson was with Tony Mackie and was driving along in his white Ford Cosworth when they were flagged down by two men in the pub car park. Their escape was blocked by a taxi.
Johnson's funeral was a spectacle that reflected both his notoriety and the deep connections he held in Manchester's underworld. More than 200 people attended, with a 30-car motorcade leading to an outdoor service at Southern Cemetery.
She brought him up in a semi-detached house in Aston Avenue, Fallowfield, which is in South Manchester, where a shrine to Keith remained, including photographs, crucifixes and even his broken spectacles, a household that was struck with tragedy.
Among the mourners were grieving family members and prominent gangland figures, a reminder of the life Johnson had led. His grandmother, Winnie Johnson, already scarred by the murder of her own son in the Moors murders, tearfully said she had now lost 2 sons. Johnson left behind 3 children, while his mother spoke candidly of his troubled beginnings and violent end.
Step-grandson's body. She later told the MEN, "As if I have not suffered enough over Keith, I cannot believe that another murder should hit us. As I stood there identifying his body, my thoughts were about losing 2 sons."
Despite widespread belief that the Noonan brothers had ordered the hit, no one was ever convicted. 2 trials ended in hung juries, and prosecutors ruled out a 3rd attempt, citing unreliable witnesses and the climate of intimidation surrounding the case. The killing remains officially unsolved, yet it is cemented as one of Manchester's most infamous gangland executions.
The cemetery's chapel and held an open-air ceremony instead. Winnie Johnson passed away aged 78 in August of 2012 after a battle with cancer.
Johnson's death not only shook his family and community, it reshaped Manchester's underworld. In the aftermath, the Noonan brothers' criminal reputation soared, with many saying they ruled Manchester from that point on. His execution in a public car park wasn't just a personal vendetta. It was a brazen show of force that brought gangland violence into everyday spaces, leaving residents shocked by its audacity. The murder became a cornerstone of the city's gangland mythology, its notoriety only growing over time. Today, White Tony's case still sits among the UK's unsolved murders of the 1990s, a grim reminder of both the power struggles of that era and the enduring lack of closure for his family.
To some, he was a volatile figure whose demise was an inevitability, as noted in various accounts. To others, he was a participant in a dangerous game, ultimately betrayed by the very underworld he inhabited.
White Tony's life and death embody the tragic cliché of gangland Britain, an early grave born from the lure of crime, power, and notoriety. Some insiders claim he was a pawn for more ruthless figures, used for his muscle and discarded once his value ran out. Nearly 25 years on, his murder remains a stark reminder of the near-impossible task of prosecuting gangland killings, where fear, witness silence, and underworld influence keep justice at bay. Yet the story continues to resonate, serving as both a cautionary tale and a call for renewed attention.